Do you have a genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease? Let's find out. Hello and welcome to the Ask Dr. Pickel show. So today we are going to get into genetics for Alzheimer's. I've had a lot of people ask me about this. They're like, hey, am I at risk for Alzheimer's? I'm starting to feel some changes in my memory. It's not as good as it used to be. What are my risks with this? What do I need to look at? Well, actually, there is something you can look at, and it's a gene. And everybody actually has a form of this gene. It's just some forms are worse than others. So let's dive right in here. All right. So there's actually what we call the Alzheimer's gene, and it's called APOE. And so these APOE genes, which means apolipoprotein E, you don't have to remember that, but there's actually three different types. There's a type 4, a type 3, and a type 2. Now, here's the other side of this, though. Our genes, this is supposed to be a gene, even though this isn't the best drawing, we have two genes because we get one from our mom, one from our dad. So everybody has two copies of this gene. Now, some people may have a APOE 4 and 3, or they could have a 4-4, or they could have a 2-2 or a 2-3. So like I'm saying, we have two copies of these. Now, what do these numbers mean? That's what we're going to talk about here in a minute, and which ones increase your risk, which ones don't. And what about this APOE gene? What does it really do, this APOE? So basically, there's something that's formed in our body. It's a protein, and we actually need it. It's a normal functioning protein in our brain, and it's called beta amyloid. Now, this beta amyloid, it's just something that our brain uses. And the problem is, though, let's put it this way. This APOE, one of its jobs is to come in and clean house. It's supposed to help kind of get rid of the extra beta amyloid so it doesn't build up. So what happens is if this gene has a problem, if this APOE gene is malfunctioning, which we'll talk about why that can happen, then you get a buildup of amyloid plaque. And this is a plaque that tends to build up, and especially it starts its buildup in areas of the brain called the hippocampus and the entorhinal cortex. And these are your memory areas. So this is where this starts to accumulate the quickest and the most. So we need those APOE genes functioning properly so they can kind of clean house, keep the plaque from building up, because if they are malfunctioning, which we'll talk about why, then we can start to have some problems. So let's dive in with this. All right. And so first one we're going to look at is APOE4. Now, this is the worst one. So if you have the APOE4 gene, and especially if you have two copies of it, because remember, we have two copies of these genes, like this would be a 4-4. Yeah, this can cause some problems. Let's look at this list here: brain degeneration, memory loss, confusion, unexplained wandering, misplacing personal belongings, difficulty remembering names and faces, impaired judgment, problem solving. And then once it gets worse, disorientation, you don't even recognize your own family members, sporadic temper, aggression, anxiety, paranoia, hallucinations, loss of mental function. It just goes downhill. So this one, again, with all of these, very important for brain repair, kind of cleaning house, getting rid of these amyloid plaques. And 30% of the population has this APOE4 gene, at least one copy. So that's kind of important to know here. All right, and that's the one you don't want. And here's the main thing is up here towards the top where it says it gives you a 12 times genetic risk for contracting Alzheimer's. That's when this gene is having problems. Now, if this gene is functioning properly, you could have the gene, but it may never cause you a problem. The thing is that's the thing to understand with genetics. Genetics give you a tendency, but it doesn't have to be your destiny. So that's the key thing to remember with all of this. If a doctor ran a genetic test on you and said, hey, you've got APOE 4/4, that's the worst, you're really susceptible to Alzheimer's. Susceptible. Now, the thing is what could make you susceptible is the question, make you more susceptible. So that's what we're going to talk about in just a minute here. All right. And then the next one here, APOE3. Now, the APOE3 really doesn't give you any increased risk of Alzheimer's. This is about 50% of the population. So if you're in this group, hey, this gene really isn't going to cause many problems, but it still could. I mean, still having this gene in itself could produce the same symptom list. It's just not an increased risk. So you can still get the issue. You can still, if this gene is not cleaning house, not getting rid of the amyloid plaque, you're still susceptible to the symptoms because this is also involved. And again, we have 2 copies of these genes, and you could be a 3/4, you could be a 3/2. All right. And then number 2, now this one kind of interesting because this reduces your risk of Alzheimer's by 4 times. So if you're going to have one, hopefully you have E2. Be nice to have an E2. If both genes are E2, hey, you're looking pretty good. Again, this gene still helps to clean up that amyloid. So it doesn't mean you can't get it, but it just helps reduce your risk. And this is about 20% of the population that has this. So, and again, the symptoms are really the same for each one of these. All right. So if you look in the research is what is causing Alzheimer's, what are the causes here? They'll say things like molecular biochemical abnormalities. Well, we don't need to talk about that. Cell loss. This means you get cell death. Something is causing inflammation in the brain, producing death of cells, or the cell walls are breaking down, which could be due to fatty acid issues. You aren't getting enough of the good fats and oils that make our brain. Neurofibrillary tangles. Yeah, so this can occur. I'm not going to get into the depths of this, but if you start to look these up, you'll find out, yeah, this is something that can start to form in your neurons, in your brain cells, and this will start to produce these types of problems too. It's kind of a house cleaning issue. And then an inflammation issue. And then dystrophic neurites. So what does that mean? It means your nerves can't transmit signals like they should. They're starting to break down and not work properly. So then other brain cells don't communicate, then they start to break down. Brain cells have to have communication. They have to be activated. They've got to be able to talk to stay healthy. If they don't talk, they start to break down. And if that's in your memory area, that's a problem. Amyloid precursor protein, that's the protein that eventually can turn into these, this amyloid beta, which can turn into these plaques. And then, of course, the amyloid beta, which is the deposits that can build up these amyloid plaques. And then activation of pro-death genes and signaling pathways. Yes, there are genes that relate to death. They relate to you getting worse with things. So we don't want those genes activated. And of course, the signaling pathways of those, we want those not signaling. Metabolic syndrome, yeah, this can be blood sugar issues, diabetes, pre-diabetes, insulin resistance, impaired energy metabolism. So this could be anything from blood sugar issues to anemias to mitochondrial issues, anything in your body that's used to manufacture energy. If it starts to break down, these cells start to break down too. Impaired energy, or excuse me, mitochondrial dysfunction. This is part of that energy production. These are these little guys in your cells that are called the powerhouses of the cells. They make ATP or energy. If they start to break down, yeah, brain cells really start to fall apart. And then chronic oxidative stress. So if you are being exposed to things that cause your body to age faster, toxins, heavy metals, infections, yeah, these increase oxidative stress. We're going to talk more about that. And then, of course, that can actually damage the DNA. Other things can damage the DNA. Then your cells cannot multiply properly, divide properly, and then you end up with more problems too. Okay, so where do we see this the most? I mean, look at the United States, totally in red, Canada in red, not looking good there. Very high rates of Alzheimer's, even in Australia. You know, if we look over in kind of Russia and some of those other areas, doesn't look as bad, but there are a lot of rural areas there. So populations are more distant from each other. And then looking even at some of these Northern European areas can be a problem. So kind of interesting there on the map. And then what are the things that can spark all this, that can drive all this? Well, yeah, toxic metals, which we can get just from things in our environment, our foods, so many sources of these things. Herbicides and pesticides, where do we usually get these? Well, if you live in an agricultural area or near one, absolutely, but also foods, giant source. Air pollutants, yeah, things in the air, things that are put in the air that we breathe in on a regular basis. Industrial, commercial chemicals, we're getting those pretty much on a daily basis. Even antimicrobials, these chemicals that we put on our hands to disinfect them, yeah, like triclosan and things like that, not good. So, all these things. So you can't really totally avoid this stuff in life. It's not as much about that. It's about your body's ability to dump this stuff, to detoxify this stuff. And if you are not a good detoxifier, yeah. And let's put it this way, most people with chronic health issues, autoimmune conditions, not the best detoxifier. So this stuff gets stuck in the system. It compromises your immune system. That leads to more bad guys getting in, infectious agents, things like that, and also more inflammation in the body, which is kind of starts this whole destructive process. It's all the inflammation, all these toxic things that cause these genes not to work properly. So now, instead of your genes being a tendency, now it does become your destiny. So when we look at Alzheimer's as the specific causes, we kind of went over some of these air, dermal absorption cosmetics, foods, crops, seafoods, meats, all these heavy metals definitely can be toxic at certain levels. Some of these look pretty good too, like zinc, manganese, copper. Don't we need those things? Well, yeah, but they can also create trouble too if they're at extreme levels. The thing to look at with copper, though, is its relationship to zinc. And we put this on here because we want to really watch that ratio. So when your doctor looks at your blood work, have them check copper, have them check zinc. And when they check those they aren't going to look at it like this usually, but those numbers should be about 1-to-1 ratio. They should be fairly equal there. And if they are, fantastic. But if it's too high or too low, yeah, you've set yourself up for an imbalance, and this could create some problems. Now, these are also conditions that can be related to these toxic things that are going on too, and things like copper zinc imbalances. All right, so chemicals. So we went over heavy metals, but let's get more into chemicals. Organochlorines, organophosphates. These are these glyphosates. These are these Roundup type chemicals, carbamates, bipyridyls, pyrethroids. Again, these are, if you start to look up these chemicals, it's like scary, but this is in our daily stuff that we're exposed to, or we eat, or if we're around, especially agricultural areas, factories, things like that. Bromine flame retardants. We don't think about that. Bromine flame retardants. So let's say they put a new carpet or a new furniture in your house, and you have them spray that protectant on there. Yeah. Or these are bromines. They're usually made of that, or they're made of fluorides. Totally toxic stuff. Or in your mattresses, they'll have that tag on it, so it's for flame retardants added. PCBs, those come from plastics, BPA, phthalates, parabens, which are also plastics with phthalates, or PCBs. And then triclosan. Triclosan originally was in the hand sanitizer. Then finally they outlawed it because it was causing so many problems. And so then they started to put in these others like the benzethonium chlorides, which these can cause problems too, which is kind of scary because they can lead to Alzheimer's. Ozone. Now, ozone is usually a good thing. It can be antibacterial, antifungal. It can have benefits, but not in your respiratory system. If you get in your respiratory system, yeah, this could create problems and affect the brain. VOCs, volatile organic compounds. That's like if you move into a house or get a new car and you have that new car smell, that new house smell, or you get new carpet and you smell it. It's toxic. That's volatile organic compounds, not good for you. Glyphosates. And then we get into air pollutants. So if you, let's say you went to the Olympics, or if you're in China, Just being in China and breathing the air in is like smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. If you're in Mumbai, India for a day, that's like smoking 5 packs of cigarettes. That's how bad the air is there. And again, these are things, these air pollutants that can increase risk for these genetic issues. And in fact, the World Health Organization said, hey, these countries, they have a high risk for all of these conditions, stroke, heart attack, lung cancer, asthma, COPD, because of this. But also, not only are this high levels of volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, um, nitrous oxide, sulfuric, sulfur oxide. There we go. Let's go down to the next one. So what do you do about this? If you have any of these genes that are having problems, you need to deal with them. And big part of this is diet. You've got to increase the good fats in your diet and get rid of the sugar. The sugar is just not good for this condition. And especially if it's more advanced, if you have dementia, if you have diagnosed Alzheimer's, then you need to start these things right away. Again, always talk to your doctor before you change anything. But especially a ketogenic diet has been shown to be very helpful in dealing with this type of a condition. And it makes sense because you're eating more of these good fats. And what's our brain made of? Good fats. We got to have them. And again, if those cells repair, regenerate, they need these fats to work. All right. And then, so what are some supplements and things that you can do also? So Ubiquinol, now Ubiquinol helps at a mitochondrial level. So it helps those cells to make more energy so they work more efficiently. Resveratrol, this is to bring down inflammation in the body and help prevent damage. The DMAE bitartrate, actually that's a precursor to choline, which turns into acetylcholine, which is very important for memory, cognition, so many things. We really need it. And then there's choline itself, which choline, you can get it like from eggs and certain things, but and you can also take choline. But again, that's a precursor to acetylcholine, which is very important for these memory areas. It's a neurotransmitter, brain chemistry. Bacopa. Now, Bacopa is an herb. It's more involved in also memory, focus, concentration. Bilberry, kind of similar thing. Another brain herb that they've shown that has positive effects on the brain. DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. This is a very important fatty acid. I don't recommend a fish oil source because that will always contain mercury. Get an algae oil. That's the safe one. So DHA, very important. Huperzine A, another one, really good, shown to improve brain function, memory function. Green tea extract, which is usually EGCG. And this one also very good for the brain and antioxidant to prevent that oxidation of the brain. B vitamins, very important in the manufacturing of neurotransmitters in the brain. And then, of course, there's that diet, that ketogenic diet. Now, do you need all these things? Maybe not, but it's finding out really what do you need, what do you not need? Are there other things on the list that you need? Do you have other associated conditions? Do you have a blood sugar issue like diabetes? Do you have some other chronic condition, autoimmune condition? See, all this kind of fits together. When you look at like a diagnosis, you can say, hey, you've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's or dementia. Well, what else have you been diagnosed with? What else do your tests show? It's putting together all the pieces and seeing what's underlying all of this. Otherwise, if you just say, oh, I'm just going to treat this alone, it could be you're just spinning your wheels and you really never get there. So it is finding out what's underneath all of it. What do I need? What do I not need? And if we do find toxins in there, how do we get rid of those as best as possible in a safe detoxification way? So I hope everybody got some great information about Alzheimer's with this. And again, there are genetic tests out there that can be run to look to find out which genes you have and if the risk is higher for you. And if it is, then maybe you need to take more steps than someone who maybe is an E2 versus if you're an E4. So, all right. Well, have a wonderful day. God bless, and I'll see you next time.